Okay, so the process of disassembly has begun. I got the heads off. Really encouraging here, or one of the things that's encouraging is when I took the cylinder heads off, if you look at that head right there, the one that has the valve springs facing this way, it's really clean. It looks like the head's been actually rebuilt. Everything inside this motor is really clean. I can still see really good crosshatch. I don't know how well that's going to show up, but it's got good crosshatch on all the cylinders. We got the cam plate off here. The cam and the lifters looks really good. I think we can probably reuse these. This is a solid lifter cam, but the lifters, I put a straight edge on them one at a time, and they're not caved in or anything. So, and the camshaft looks fairly new. Not a lot of wear on that cam. So, these cams basically last forever in these things. So the pistons look decent. They got carbon buildup. Of course, we're going to go through and re-ring all that. Another thing that I did is I took the bell housing and the flywheel off to get this thing ready to go on the engine stand. Now this is the intake manifold. The manifold is just this little dinky thing here. It's really basically just a manifold. It doesn't have any water going through it or anything. It's a dry manifold. This is another piece that goes on the front. Of course, it takes the thermostat housing and so forth, and that goes into the front of the heads. So we got the rocker shafts, the valve covers and all that stuff off, and looked at that. Everything looks good. The heads look good. And so what I need to do now is I need to put the block up on the engine stand, but the bolts back here in the back are 1/2 inch. I don't have a 1/2 inch bolt that's long enough for my engine stand, so I'm going to have to wait until tomorrow to go to the hardware store and get those. But we're well on our way, so once I get those bolts and get this on the stand, we'll continue getting this thing apart and see what we have to work with here. Looks pretty clean. I mean, this is the typical combustion chamber that they used on this. They had a pretty heavy duty type head gasket. The tune looks pretty good. This gasket looks like it might have been leaking here in the center a little bit, and we'll check the warpage on these heads. But I got the rocker shafts, some of the accessories, the distributor, the intake manifold and exhaust manifolds, and then of course our bolts. So that brings us to our short block here. And I'm going to start disassembling this turkey. So let's get to it. Water pump's not really just this part here. It's not very big, and there's just 4 little 1/2 inch nuts holding this thing. And that is your cast iron water pump. Hopefully I can find one of these, because I really don't want to reuse this guy. So we'll have to see if we can get one of those. And then your pulleys here. Bunch of little 1/2 inch bolts in here. This guy. Okay, the bolt on the front of the balancer here takes a 15/16 socket, and torque on that's pretty high, so we use our impact to get that thing off of there. There's a big washer and a bolt on there. Your pulley comes off. That's just one of the V-belt pulleys. And then we have this piece here, which is what's known as the balancer of the pulley. It doesn't have a real significant balancer on this thing. It does have, this is a sheet metal cover here, and there's a couple of little rivets in it, so it all just comes off together. All right, next we got our puller on here, and we'll pull this baby off of here. I don't think these are pressed on that hard. Well, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say that. the balancer on this thing, I mean, man, it's just like this hub, and this is just a little piece of sheet metal, this ring, so it really doesn't have a super significant balancer up here. You got your seal surface here, and you just pull that off, and then now what that does is that exposes our front cover here. Let's get this hose off here, and we'll start looking at this front cover. This engine came complete with hoses and all, and that looks like a fairly new hose too. Still got the Napa tag on it. So now this front cover has a bunch of 9/16 bolts in it. We're just going to pull those. And then right here, you've got another bolt on top that comes in this way, and it comes into the cover here. You don't want to forget that. And there's also a couple of bolts coming in from the front of the oil pan down here that you want to get. The bolts in the front of the pan look like they are 1/2 inch. But they definitely go into this front cover, so you got to get these out. You can see the tops of the bolts here sticking out in this cover. You know, one of the things I noticed about this engine, and I'm not sure why, but every single bolt in this motor has a lock washer on it. Not flat washers, they're all lock washers. I don't know if that was GM's attempt at making this thing more heavy duty for situations where there's lots of vibrations or what, but it's just kind of interesting that everything has lock washers on it. So that is your front cover. And let me tell you, man, this thing is freaking heavy. That is all solid cast iron. That is a big chunk of iron there. So once you get that off out of the way, it looks pretty clean in there. We'll set that aside. And we expose the front of our engine with our timing chain. Has a really long timing chain on it. And what's cool about this is we talk about performance engines and so forth. And usually we take the single chains off of them, we put a double roller chain on. This engine has a double roller chain from the factory. Okay, pizza's here, so grandkids. Now, my understanding is that the 351 version of this engine, and this is an oil slinger, you want to make sure you take that off. The 351 version of this engine has a triple roller chain, which is 3 rows of chain, which is pretty amazing. That chain's pretty loose on this thing, and so we are definitely going to have to replace that. Also, the fuel pump eccentric on this looks very similar to like a 390 Ford. It's really identical to one of those. Got a really significant bolt in it. Takes a 3/4 inch socket to get that off of there. So we'll buzz that off of there. And that is your big washer. Fuel pump eccentric for the mechanical fuel pump has a little dowel on it. That's going to go there. Once you get to that point, one of the things they talk about in the hot rod world is they talk about the fact that you really don't want to have a single bolt cam gear simply because it could shear or whatever, but they have a really significant cotter key, not cotter key, but a Woodruff type key in here, much like a crank key to keep this thing in place. So it's a pretty heavy duty deal. And then this just slides off of there like so. All right, guys, so what I did off camera, and this is something that I do not like to do, I couldn't get the cam gear off of the cam without pulling this gear. And this gear, somebody has been into this and they boogered up this keyway, and I couldn't get this gear to move. So I'm gonna have to put a puller on it. And so what I did is I cut the chain with a die grinder. Now, this is really not standard procedure, but since I already have a line on a bunch of parts for this and I was already planning on replacing the chain, and this thing was just as loose as a goose, it's scrap anyway, so that's just kind of a shortcut. The other way would be to work on this and try to get it off of there. I didn't really have the ambition for that, but you can see there's a keyway in the cam here. This is our camshaft here, and there's a retaining plate on the front of the cam, and then the gear has a key. I want to try to save these gears if I can, because I can buy a new set of gears if need be. But these gears are quite expensive. If I can't save this gear, I'm going to have to replace it with a new one. So, but at this point, we got that off of there. So that's what that's all about. Now we have this retaining plate on the front of the cam here that we have to get off, and then the cam should come out. But what I want to talk to you about before I do that is the lifters. So this is a flat tappet cam in this engine. So I've kind of rotated this around so you can see the cam and the lifters here, and you can see the cam's actuating the lifters. We're going to reuse this cam because it looks like it's in really good shape. So if you're going to reuse the cam and lifters, one of the things that you need to make sure you do, this is what they call a flat tappet type lifter, and they are definitely wear mated. You don't want to mix these lifters up. So what I did is I pulled the lifters out one by one, and I numbered them so I know where they go. So when I put this back in, if we end up reusing the cam, then we can, we know where they go. They go back in the same hole. If you mix those lifters up, you're going to have problems with severe cam wear. To be honest, I'm not totally sure if we're going to reuse this cam or not. I got to get it out and inspect it a little better, and then we'll go from there. I'm not sure how available these cams are. There is a chance there's a shop in town here that can actually regrind the cam and the lifters, so that's always a possibility as well. That brings us back to the cam plate here. We loosen up the bolt. Now on this cam plate, there's a couple of grooves in it here, and these are pretty important. I'll show you what these look like. Let's get the bolts out. This is our camshaft retaining plate. There's some grooves in this. Some of these have grooves on the front and the back, and this one does. So these are just oil retention grooves. The plates that only have the grooves on one side, that needs to go back toward the block, but this one has it on both sides, so we're good on that. And then we have our little Woodruff key, and we basically, now you want to be careful when you pull this cam out. You don't want to nick or gouge these bearings, so we just carefully retract this cam from the head. You want to kind of gently work this thing out of here and line these bearings up without gouging those cam bearings. And now, what's really cool about this camshaft on this engine is it's basically what they call an oil bath cam. So there's a reservoir in there under the cam, and as the cam is rotating, it actually, there's a puddle of oil, or there's literally a little trough under here that holds oil in here, and these cam lobes are dipping down into that oil, so there's lots of lubrication on this cam. That was one of the reasons that these cams really had such a good life. You really didn't see a lot of severe wear on these types of cams because they were constantly running in oil. Now, running a camshaft in oil is probably not the best setup for any kind of a performance engine. But keep in mind, this is an industrial truck engine. It turns very low RPM. We're not trying to zing this up to real high RPMs. What we want is big, heavy, beefy parts like this, and we want them lubricated very, very well. One of the design features of this engine was that they designed it so that the cooling capacity of this engine is just phenomenal. The cooling system circulates something like 134 gallons of liquid a minute through this giant cooling system. And then we have features like the oil bath or the oil trough that literally the lower portion of the cam here rides in a puddle or a bath of oil to keep it lubricated, and it really makes these parts last. This engine was really a very unique design, so it's kind of cool. Let me show you that. That's your oil bath there. If you look at it, there's literally a trough underneath the cam that fills up with oil, and you can see that cam rides in that oil and keeps it really well lubricated. It's really a cool deal. You know, we've drained the engine of oil. A lot of times this canister is going to have oil in it, so you want to kind of take this off. It just unscrews from here, and there's usually some oil in this thing. And we also have a canister type filter. Yeah, this thing is just full of oil, so just dump this out, and there's your canister type filter. These canister type filters were pretty popular, I mean, back in the early days, and then they kind of went away, and we went to this you know, enclosed filter with the metal housing. But these have kind of come back on the newer vehicles, so that's your filter there, and we're definitely going to want to replace that. So then we have this guy here. This is the filter housing, and it also has the pressure relief valve and the sending unit built into it. So it's all kind of configured into one piece here on the external portion of the block. And this is part of the lubrication system, and the oil passage is connected to this. So this kind of stuff is something we want to clean up real good in the back tank and make sure we get this stuff. And that is the filter head with the relief valve and the sending unit. This stuff comes off the block. This is a lot like a diesel. A lot of the bigger diesel engines have external components like this. It kind of reminds me of some of the diesels I've done in the past. This is the breather. We'll have to figure out how to get that out. But at this point, we can turn the block upside down, and I think we're going to be in business. There's quite a few bolts in here, but I took most of these out off camera. And there's the lower end of our engine. That's our oil pan, and you want to look for signs of metal and damage in the pan. This pan actually looks really good. I don't see hardly any metal or anything in it. Probably could have used an oil change, but I don't see any serious, obvious problems there in the oil. Then we take a look at the lower end of their engine. Big, heavy, beefy rods. I mean, these rods are just huge. I've seen diesel engines that had rods similar to this or even smaller than this. It's just a real big, beefy rod and a reinforced piston, and the pistons look fairly new in this, which is a good sign. And the oil doesn't have a lot of metal in it. So this is our crankshaft, and the main caps are numbered on these from the factory, so makes it real convenient so you don't mix them up. The thrust bearing is actually on the number 3. You can see the flanges of the thrust bearing there. It's on the number 3 cap. And then the back here we have a cap that has the side seals on it, and this cap slides in over the crankshaft, a lot like a 390 Ford. So it's a pretty stout, and all of the caps have pretty heavy-duty bolts in them. The thrust cap has a dowel pin locating on each side, which is just to give it a positive location there. So we'll rotate this around and we'll start getting this out. Everything looks really clean on the bottom end of this motor. And like I said, this motor is going to be for sale when we get this thing done. We're going to make it like brand new. So let's get one of these pistons out. So we're going to concentrate on this cylinder right here, which is one of our front cylinders. We're going to take a good look at this. See if we can get that out of there. And you know, these bearings they're not new, but they look okay. They got some scratches and stuff on them. We'll definitely want to replace those. One of the things you want to do on the bearings, you can look at it and see what size it is. It usually has a date on it. And this is a 10 thousandths undersized bearing, and it's an aftermarket bearing made by Clevite, which tells me this engine has been rebuilt. And that would explain why it's so clean inside. Our upper insert that came down off of there. But one of the things that we want to do here is, you see we've got these rod studs that are kind of exposed to the crank here. You never want to push this piston out and take the chance of nicking or damaging the crank. This is a tool that Powerhouse sells here. It's just what they call a journal protector. And these go over the bolts. Alright, so there is your piston. Now, for those of you that are familiar with diesel pistons, this is very, very reminiscent of a diesel engine piston. I mean, this is, if you look at this sucker, it's got this, I've seen, like I say, I've seen a lot of diesel engines that have piston and rods very similar to this. Very large bolts, big beefy rods. Skirted pistons here, and then this one actually has 3 compression rings and an oil ring, so it actually has 4 rings. And it also is a full floating piston, which means there's a C-clip in here, and it also has a bushing in the rod, so you can just take the C-clip out, slide the pin out, and you can rebush the rods. So we'll go ahead and get the rest of them. The pistons look really good. They look fairly new. I mean, if you I've seen motors that, you know, had a lot worse looking pistons than this. These pistons almost look like they're, you know, they look very new. So somebody's been into this motor. I would imagine it's definitely oversized, and that explains why we can still see all the crosshatch on the cylinder. So this is a really nice engine here. Alright, so we're going to get the rest of these out, and then we'll take a look at the block. Alright, so we got all the pistons out of it. I'll get back to those a little bit later. And of course everything that came off is going on our cart here. And we exposed the crankshaft down here. The crankshaft turns real nice. I started loosening up some of these. I checked the end thrust on it. The end thrust is really good, about 5 or 6 thousandths. And the bearings, this engine's been rebuilt. The crank's 10 under. So everything looks really good on this. We're going to get the crank out. I did find a problem with it though, and I'll get back to that in a little bit after I get this crank out, and we'll talk about this turkey. We got the main caps off, and we're looking at the bottom of the engine now. It's got this big beefy crank. It is a cast crank, but it's a solid beefy crank. And so that's pretty much it. I mean, we're going to get the crank out and get everything in the machine shop, and I'll probably put a bore gauge in it and start measuring some of these clearances to see where we're at, and then we'll know where we need to take this from there. One other thing, these pistons. Okay, so the bummer about this is, I mean, we look at these pistons here and they look almost brand new. I know it's a replacement piston because it has the 3 compression rings. The stock ones didn't have that, but the replacement pistons do. We got a problem though. Right here on the skirts, I think this thing got a little hot and they started to transfer metal. So we've got 3 pistons that started to scuff and galled against the cylinder walls. And the cylinder walls are showing a little bit of that too, although I think the cylinder walls are okay because I can see the crosshatch. That'll probably hone out of there. But unfortunately, these 3 pistons, they're done. So we're going to have to get at least 3 replacement pistons for this thing. Other than that, everything looks really good. And so that's part 2, the teardown. We'll get everything cleaned up and go from there. Now, just a quick note. Underneath here is our next project. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I can't tell you what it is. Actually, I can tell you what it is, I just don't want to. So this is a, you know, and the thing is, I'm trying to come up with new stuff, and a lot of this stuff, like I said, I am going to be selling when I'm done. Also, I'm kicking around the idea of having a raffle. I'm going to be changing my site, and I'm going to have a pay section for my site coming up. We're working on that right now. It's going to be really cheap. We're thinking like $1.50 a month, or maybe $1 a month, just to offset some of the costs. You know, obviously we're not going to get rich doing that, but this kind of stuff is expensive, and I've got, you know, I've spent a lot of money on this, and so I've got to offset some of these costs. But what I'm going to do, for those of you that want to subscribe and become a pay subscriber for $1, $1.50 a month, whatever we decide to charge, we're going to have a giveaway every month. And we're not just giving away, you know, like little trinkets. I think the first giveaway that we've come up with, I was talking to Christopher, my partner. Christopher's my silent partner. You guys never see him because he's camera shy, but a lot of the stuff that goes on and a lot of the stuff that happens on the site, as even some of the questions that are answered, is going to be from Christopher, and he's fully capable of doing that. But we're trying to work that out, and I believe the first giveaway is a toolbox full of tools. It's like a brand new set of Craftsman tools and a pretty substantial toolbox. And so to those that subscribe, become a member, and pay the small fee every month there's going to be a giveaway. And also we're considering, among that group of people who pays, we are considering doing a raffle for some of these engines. I'm not fully on board with that yet, because there's kind of some legal ramifications that we're trying to work out, but we're thinking about doing that, and it's a possibility. And so underneath these nice clean towels that my sister-in-law bought my wife for Christmas, and my wife didn't like, so she gave them to me for the shop, is our next project. Now, this is a very unique engine. You can only do small block Chevys so many times. I guarantee you this is not a small block Chevy. You can try to guess what this is. Good luck with that. They only made this engine for 4 years, and it is considered a performance engine. It is not a Chevy, a Ford, or a Dodge, I'll give you that. It is American made though. And it is a very, very rare engine, very unique, and we are going to walk through this step by step. This engine, much like the V6 that we just tore down, has a cult following as well. They didn't make very many of these. It's actually a very rare piece, and I saw it for sale, and I said, I'm buying that. We're doing a build on that turkey. I've always wanted to do one just like this 305 V6. I've always wanted to do one of these too. So if you can guess what that is, I guess you'll find out soon enough, but I don't want to reveal that yet. I don't want to do the reveal on that because we're right in the middle of this 305 thing. And so I appreciate you watching. That's part 2. That's the teardown. If you have any questions or comments, like I said, we don't have the crank out of it or anything. Well, first of all, I'm going to stick it in my vat tank, and then I'm going to clean everything up, inspect it, and work on the block. We'll probably do the valve job on the heads as one separate video. I'll probably just do a complete valve job on those. I don't believe these heads have hardened exhaust seats in them for unleaded fuel, so that's something that we're going to do. We're going to set them up and put the hardened seats in and do a valve job. And we may deck the block. I don't know if I have a fixture with my BHJ setup. Or I know I have the fixture. I don't know if I have the correct size rings for the decking machine. And we'll check the deck and see anyway. The decks are so thick on these, they don't usually get hurt. But I think the motor did get a little warm, started to scuff some of the pistons, so we're definitely going to have to replace 3 of the pistons. But other than that, everything looks really nice on this motor. This is a good engine. Doesn't have very many miles on it. It's been rebuilt. It's been bored oversized and honed, and the crank's cut under, and the pistons look almost new. So I don't think it has that many miles on it when they got it hot and hurt the pistons, but we'll correct that problem. So I appreciate you watching, and we'll continue with this. Make sure you subscribe below and think about some of the stuff I've talked about for the future. I'm going to be taking on some viewers that pay every month and help to offset the cost. But again, you will be in the running for, I'm actually going to have some pretty substantial giveaways down the road. If that thing really takes off, we will probably be giving away engines. And so you want to get out on the ground floor of that, because that's going to be something that's pretty cool. I'm honestly, I had no idea when I started this YouTube channel. I had no idea it was going to take off like this. I mean, I literally am overwhelmed with all of your support and everybody that's just, you know, it's just really, it's turned into, it's taken on a life of its own. I literally get over 100 emails and messages a day. If you ask me a question and I don't respond to you for 2 months or not at all, it's not because I don't value you. It's because there's not enough hours in the day to keep up. So I am going to get some help with that. And so there's some tools and stuff that we're putting in place. So hopefully you're intrigued by all this. I appreciate it. Keep in mind there's going to be a roadkill event in January, and I don't know the exact date, but it's at Tucson Dragway. So if you want, you can get on the Motor Trend On Demand, and they'll give you more details on that. I know David Freiberger and Mike Finnegan are going to be there, so it's a roadkill deal. That's at Tucson Dragway in, I believe, mid-January. And if you want specifics about that, you can ask below, and I will get that information to you. So I appreciate you watching. Make sure you check me out on Facebook at My Vintage Iron 7512. That's where you probably want, I got a Q&A session coming up, so if you want to ask questions for the Q&A, Facebook is a place that you do that. My Vintage Iron 7512. Make sure you subscribe below, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. This engine has a double roller chain from the factory. Okay. Pizza's here, so. Grandkids.
Hello.
What's up, baby? You want to be on YouTube?
Yeah.
Come here.
Want me to go or no?
Come over here, on this side. Crouch down. This is my beautiful granddaughter. Obviously, this is going to be in the blooper reel at the end. Say hi.
Hi.
This is Natalie. Isn't she wonderful? Yes, she is. She came to tell me that the pizza's ready, right? You know what this is?
An engine?
It is an engine. What's that right there? It's one of those engine thingies, right? That's a chain. It's a tiny chain. All right, ready to go eat pizza?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.